Hello and welcome to Foreign Affairs Focus. I'm Jonathan Tepperman, Managing Editor of Foreign Affairs. With me today is Damien Ma, a crack China analyst at Eurasia Group here in Washington, D.C. China is very much in the news today, as it is every day. Two big stories, the economic slowdown and the political transition, and one, of course, feeds into the other. Damien, I'd like to start by talking about the transition. In your view, how well is Beijing managing it so far? Keeping in mind stories about Bo Xilai and the disappearance of Xi Jinping, etc.
Well, I think it could certainly have been better, but I think in terms of being totally destabilizing, I don't think that's really the case. Mm-hmm. I don't think Bo Xilai has derailed the transition in any sense. Mm-hmm. I think the date came out today. It's going to be November 8th. If people can think back to 2002, during when Hu Jintao came to power, it's the same exact date. Mm-hmm. So we're within the realm of the orderly transition process. Mm-hmm. So I think the process is okay, but I think, you know, not just the domestic politics, but, you know, you got handed a pretty big foreign policy conundrum in the Senkaku Island dispute, much like how Libya has interjected itself in the campaign here. Mm-hmm. So I think there are things there that could make it, uncertain, but I think overall it's looking like it's a fairly stable transition.
And how are we to interpret the disappearance of Xi, for example? Was it just a backache or a minor heart attack? I mean, did it have political implications? What's your take?
Well, the most outlandish rumor I've heard was that he was the victim of a possible assassination attempt. So I think rumors were swirling around. I think what this really reflects is that this system, this political party, for how much it has changed, it really remains very much the same in terms of the opacity. Mm-hmm. Nobody will ever know what exactly happened to Xi. Right. And I think it could have been an injury, but I think more likely there are a lot of things on his plate that he had to deal with, and it's possible that he had to manage the Japanese crisis behind the scenes.
Now, is it fair to assume that these are all signs of discord within the ruling elite, of serious fractures and tensions?
No, I don't think there were serious fractures. I think disagreements were certainly happening, for sure. I think with the Bo Xilai incident a few months ago, there was definitely discord at the top, but it's not the same kind of factional breakdown that we saw in 1989, for example, that led to mass protests. It is not quite there yet, but I think at any transition, there's simply going to be pretty big disagreements.
Sure. Now, the Times ran a story a few days ago arguing that political disagreements, discord, factional infighting, what have you, is starting to have an impact on the economy because it's preventing the government from making the kind of reforms that everybody agrees is necessary. What's your opinion?
I have a slightly different view. I think in terms of immediate growth, the transition is actually arguably going to be positive for it, because no leadership, outgoing or incoming, would want to have a collapsing economy on its hands. So I think there's this impetus to stimulate more if things really to go south. And I think we're not quite there yet. And I think the leadership still feels that they can meet the 7.5% growth target this year. Now, the transition could potentially be a negative for rebalancing, simply because I think there is a very big looming outstanding question of what to do and how to reform, and whether how to go about really rebalancing without any sort of political transformations. I think that is one of the biggest constraints on how successful China will be going forward.
And beyond stimulus and rebalancing, what is the consensus view on the other big changes China needs to make to keep hitting its growth targets?
I think the top priority is addressing social inequality. China's Gini coefficient is probably around 0.5, which is very, very crucial. It's very high, and it is going to create destabilizing factors in the economy and society. So I think social welfare, some people liken it to a New Deal with Chinese characteristics. I think those are the priorities that the leadership must tackle. Not simply because there's demand for it, bottom-up demand for it, and because there's structural factors like a rapidly aging society that will absolutely require fixing the pension system, better healthcare, those types of things.
And how bullish or bearish are you on the Beijing's ability to hit these marks?
I am bullish on the immediate term because they have money to spend, but I think in terms of tackling the structural reforms, again, it will require a bit more political will and political capital to really tackle some of the structural issues.
So does that mean, for example, that Xi and his new government need to establish themselves and build legitimacy before they can make these changes?
Exactly. I think it's going to be at least a year before we see anything meaningful. I think, you know, unlike perhaps leaders in other countries, the Chinese leaders tend to grow in strength and power further down the line.
Right. Well, it's said that American presidents tend not to do anything significant in foreign policy in their first year because they don't have the standing to do so. Do you think the same holds for China?
That's actually an interesting question. I actually think there's a great uncertainty over what's going to happen with China and Japan after the transition. It is possible that a new leadership to prove their mettle, to prove, you know, their sort of stance on being tough on Japan, that they could do something more drastic.
What kind of something would that be? How far do you think they'd be willing to go?
I don't think anybody is hoping for a military engagement with Japan, but I think you know, perhaps squeeze Japan harder on trade, sanctions, those types of things that are, I think, you know, short of an actual, you know, fires being shot, basically.
Putting yourself in the head of the Chinese leaders for a moment, how do you think they see Japan? Do they see Tokyo as weak and disorganized and capable of being bullied and pushed around?
I don't think so, because I think I was actually just in Beijing for a week, and all our meetings were discussing this issue, and I think they see Tokyo not as weak, primarily because I think they believe they're in a very strong alliance with the United States, and we have a real security treaty with Japan. So they sort of view Japan as sort of a proxy for sort of U.S. strength. So they don't underestimate Japan, but at the same time, they are very concerned that it was that this U.S. pivot to Asia is really leading to a lot of these outcomes from Tokyo down to Manila.
So that's a good segue into talking about China and the U.S. How do you see everything that we've discussed coming out of the transition affecting U.S.-China relations? I
think the key takeaway that I got was there was a remarkable deepening of mistrust over U.S. intentions, and I think the bottom line implication that I sort of got from the Chinese side was that they felt that we were a constructive and stabilizing force in Asia for the last, say, decade or so.
We being China or the United States?
The United States. And with the pivot, with what's happening in Asia now, I think there's a sense that we have become a destabilizing force. And I think they're questioning our sincerity of how to play a constructive role in Asia, given what's going on. And so I think, you know, what the Chinese would want, of course, is for us to lean on, you know, the Philippines and Japan harder, just as we asked them to lean on North Korea. That's the analogy that they're looking at, and so I think it's going to be a fairly tough issue, I think, going forward.
Do you think, therefore, that the pivot has been a mistake because it's exploited Chinese insecurities, and that rather than responding to what looked like Chinese aggression from Washington's eyes with a firmer stance, Washington should have tread more softly?
I don't think it was a mistake per se, but I think perhaps there's an argument to be made that there was too much emphasis on the security side of the pivot, whereas I think it is as much about the economic side as the other side, and I think that there may need to be a bit of a recalibration to the rebalancing to Asia.
Damien Ma, that's all we have time for. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.